Greetings folks, my name is Anto and today I'm going to be taking a look at Foundry Virtual Tabletop. This is a program that has come highly recommended by a bunch of folks I know. Pretty much everyone I know that has tried it becomes a huge advocate for it. So over the Christmas break I picked up Foundry and I want to run you through kind of my first impressions of it, a little bit of a showcase of how it works. I'm going to talk about whether or not I think it's worth it. This video is sponsored by my upcoming Kickstarter, the Class Cheat Sheets for 5e. I want to help make 5e easier to learn than ever before with a set of cheat sheets specific to each class that shows you what's available to you for that class, as well as giving you some options for common things that you can do in combat. There'll be a link down in the description below where you can sign up to get notified as soon as the Kickstarter goes live. So this is the website for Foundry VTT. It is a one-time $50 purchase and there is a demo available on the website. I honestly cannot recommend it though. Every time I try to use the demo, I just did not have a good experience. It was really clunky and it's an open demo to a world so people can go in and change a bunch of stuff. It does refresh, but I don't think it gives you... I think it does more harm than good, the demo. I think that for me, it was much more effective having people that I know and trust say, I've used this, it's really good, you should try it out, versus having a demo. I think watching videos about Foundry has probably been more beneficial to me than using the web demo, certainly before I picked up the software. And then once I got it and started diving into it, then everything became much clearer than having to use that demo. Before we dive in, there's a couple things that you need to know about that will affect your decision on whether or not Foundry is right for you. First of all, there is a large modding community that makes mods for different systems and to improve gameplay for a whole bunch of different stuff. But you're only going to get 5th edition SRD content in here. You're not going to be able to buy the player's handbook through Foundry. You're not going to be able to get a lot of that content. So if you don't have a D&D Beyond account, and I'll come back to that in a minute, you are going to have to add a lot more stuff 5th edition wise here than you might otherwise do on another platform, something like Fantasy Grounds or Roll20, where you can buy the official books. That being said, there is an excellent mod that allows you to import things from D&D Beyond. So if you have a D&D Beyond account and you own the books over there, like I do, I've got all the books over there. So for me, I can just pour all of my D&D Beyond books into Foundry and access all of the material, which is my primary motivation for wanting to switch to Foundry from my current setup, which is on Fantasy Grounds, because on Fantasy Grounds I only have a small number of the books. If something comes out in a new book that I get on D&D Beyond or physically and I wanted to add it to Fantasy Grounds, I've got to do all of the legwork manually, and that can take a lot of time. So for me, if I can bring in all of my D&D Beyond books through these mods, makes my life so much easier. That said, there are a bunch of systems that do have full support. Pathfinder 2nd edition, for example, because everything is on Archives of Nethys for free as part of the Pathfinder SRD, the entire system is available within Foundry and you can run it really easily. So what I recommend doing is going and checking out the systems and modules pages and trying to get a sense for how supported your system is, to get an idea of how easy you're going to have a time of setting everything up and hitting the ground running. Obviously, you can add all of these things manually, just like you can with most VTTs, but if you can take away that step and get up and running that much quicker, you're going to have a much better time with it. So once you purchase Foundry and download it and fire it up for the first time, you're going to be met with a page very similar to this. So you can see I've gone ahead and created a couple of different worlds. I've got my Cursed Sands of Ash world. I've also got a test world for Pathfinder 2, because I do want to get into Pathfinder 2, but by default there will be a 5th edition test system kind of here. I think that comes by default. I don't think I made that, though I don't exactly remember, but you have the option to install worlds and create worlds, and if you go ahead and click create worlds, you have the option to choose what game system you want, and you install these on another tab that I'll show you now. So I've got the Cyberpunk Red core system, D&D 5e, Pathfinder 2nd edition and Starfinder, and you get these by going and clicking on the game systems tab and then install system, and you will find a whole huge list of different systems that are available. And that's why I say you want to go and look at the systems that are available on the Foundry website. look to see if your preferred system is supported and how much it's supported, how much of the material is going to be bundled in when you first load it up versus how much you have to install yourself. The other big benefit of Foundry is modules. Now, modules can change almost everything about Foundry and the system that you're playing. So you go over here and click on the add-on modules, and you can see I've got a variety already installed. I've got that D&D Beyond importer. Like I said, this allows me to pull all my information from my D&D Beyond account into Foundry, which means that I now have access to every 5th edition release as soon as it is available through my Foundry. Then I've got Dice So Nice, which adds 3D dice. Then I've got Dice Tray, which just adds a little UI change. I'll show you that in a moment. Then I've got Starfinder Stat Block Parser. That just helps me pull NPC stat blocks and things like that from PDFs from Starfinder, just to make my life a little bit easier. Then I've got Tokenizer, which just helps make tokens on the fly a little bit easier than having to use an external piece of software. If I go ahead here and click on Install Module, you can see that there are so many modules available. At the time of recording, there's nearly 1,200 modules available for Foundry across all different game systems, as well as system neutral useful tools like the Dice So Nice or the Dice Tray. And this is going to make it so that you can really customize Foundry to be an experience that matches the way that you want to play. I've barely scratched the surface of modules at the moment. I'm starting nice and simple, using just a couple of cosmetic modules and that D&D Beyond importer, just so I can get a feel for the system, run some games in it and get used to it before I start diving in and adding all the really weird and exciting modules. But there's a lot of really cool sounding stuff in there. One thing to note is that if you are going to get Foundry and you want to play with your friends, the easiest way to do it, depending on where you live, is to self-host. So that just means that you, as the game master, launch a server, a Foundry server, from your computer, and then everyone connects to that. That does mean that you need to set up some port forwarding and jump through a few hoops. It's not overly difficult, but it does require going into your router's settings to be able to change the port forwarding options, and it might require a little bit of command line adjustment if that doesn't work. I spent a couple of hours trying to get mine to work because it just wouldn't connect, but I went over to the Foundry Discord, got some instructions on how to change some stuff in the command line registry, typed it all up. It was super simple, and then it worked fine and has worked perfectly ever since. But that is something to consider if you don't have access to your router settings. If you live in a college dorm or somewhere that has monitored internet and you can't get in and change those ports, in that case you would have to look into paying to have your Foundry server hosted, in which case another option might be better for you. So you want to just check that, make sure that that is something that you're going to be able to do before you pick up the software. So we're about ready to dive into one of my worlds and show you the setup. So all you need to do is go ahead and click Launch World. It'll load up for a minute, and then you get this splash page. This is one of my favorite parts of Foundry because it gives you this introduction to the game. So if you're running a game for people, you can do like I've done. You can put the map of your world, you can put a description of the campaign setting, get people in the headspace and in the mood to play before they fully load up. And then all you need to do is go ahead and choose your user. So I've set up users for myself and all of my players. Put in your password if you have one, and then click Join Game Session. And then once you've done this as the game master, all of your players are going to be able to remote connect to this through the internet. So the way that you invite folks over to your server is you go to this right hand section here, click on the little cogwheels for game settings, and then go down to invitation links, and that will bring up this page here that you can go ahead and copy and paste that. Then go over to your web browser, paste in that address, and it will start to load up your world. So you can see here the cursed standard ash, it shows the login screen that we've just had within Foundry, and then you can select a user and go ahead and put in the password, hit Join Game Session if you've put the password in correctly, which I did not, and then you are logged in as a player. And we're going to jump between the player view and the game master view as we go through this, just so that you can get a sense of how the two work. So back in Foundry, let's go ahead and run through some of the interface. I know that for a lot of people, seeing the interface for a new system can be really overwhelming, so I want to help give you a sense of what everything does. So we're going to start top left and kind of work our way around. So up here we have just the Foundry logo, you don't need to worry about that. And then down the left hand side here we've got a bunch of buttons. This first option is the token controls, so it allows you to select and move tokens, select specific targets, and also to measure distances. So you can see here that if we zoom in a little bit, I can measure the distances between 2 points on my map, and because I have set up the distances of the grid, it tells me that the distance between Titan's Bones and the Ruins of Ashai is 210 miles. And that's really useful both in combat to be able to tell how many feet away a creature is, but also for a world map like this, when your players say, I want to go from Kadim to Almas, how do I do that? You can show them kind of where they go, and if you hold control and click, you can plot the exact route and travel along, and you can see, right, okay, that will take you 320 miles. And then you have the measurement tools. So you have the circle, cone, square, and ray tool, and that allows you to draw the shapes for spell effects or show what areas are impacted by different effects and things like that. Next, you have the tile controls. This is essentially for building a map within Foundry. You have a bunch of different assets that you can kind of tile together to make almost like a procedurally generated map. You can make it as you go. I don't use this purely because I have access to other mapping tools like Incarnate or Dungeon Draft or Wonder Draft, but it is an option that is available if you want to play around with it. Next, you have the drawing tools, and in there you've got the options to draw shapes. You've got polygon tools, general writing tools, and text tools. This is really useful if you're running a combat and you want to highlight a certain area, or you have a map in front of your players and you want to draw their attention to a specific place. You can grab your circle tool and kind of draw a circle around it and show them where you are trying to draw their attention to. Next up, we have wall controls and light controls, and these are really intrinsically linked. So to show them off, I'm going to jump over into a different scene, and we'll talk about scenes in a moment and kind of show you how they work together. So for this, I have my Tomb of the Jade Tyrant. This is the starter adventure for my Ash campaign, and you can see I've got the map, and all of the boundaries have got these little white lines that run around them. So these are all walls, and within the wall tool you can set different parameters. So you start off and you have the ability to just draw walls, but you can also draw terrain which interacts with light a little bit differently. You can draw invisible walls, you can draw secret ethereal walls, so things that characters can move through but they can't see through. You can add doors, you can add secret doors, and you can also clone sections of your walls and force snapping to grid and things like that. And you use this in combination with the light tool to be able to dictate player vision. So as a player, if we go ahead here and jump over to my player option, I need to right click on this scene and activate it, and what that does is it sends it out to my players. And you'll see that on my player client side, it is loading up for the Tomb of the Jade Tyrant, and once that's finished loading up, I'll be able to control one of the tokens and show you how the walls and light interact. Okay, so in my GM version of this map, you can see I can see the entire map. I can see where all the walls are, the doors, all of the monsters, all of my walls, everything like that. But if we jump over to the player version, I'm controlling Goop here, our little fairy arcane archer. All of the player tokens have a vision radius, which we set up within the GM side of things to say this is how far a creature can see, this is whether a creature has dark vision, and then within those wall settings we can define whether they can be seen through, whether doors can be seen through, all of that good stuff. So with Goop here, we can move up and you can see that what Goop sees dynamically changes. So as we drag Goop forward into this room, you can see that there are 4 points of illumination, 5 points of illumination. There's the 4 lanterns on the wall and the little campfire in the middle. If I zoom here as the GM, I can jump into my light tool, and I have placed all of these lights as little nodes, and I can control them and set their parameters. I can choose how far they cast light. I can choose what kind of light, what color, whether there's any illuminated effects. You can set it so that the lights can breathe or have different animated effects, but I can also turn off the lights. So if we switch back between the GM and player screens, now the light in here is off, and if I turn all of them off, if the character doesn't have dark vision, they lose access to sight. So they remember what they've seen, so they know the shape of the room because they've seen it, but as you can see, 2 of the skeletons have now disappeared because they are no longer illuminated. They can only half see one of the skeletons because the light that's coming in from outside illuminates that skeleton, and if I move them around, you can see that they can't actually see anything that's going on. And that difference in control of light makes things really interesting when it comes to exploration. So if I grab Goop here and drop them in this little corridor and start pushing them forward, you can see that because Goop doesn't have dark vision, they can't see anything that is in front of them. So it means that no one forgets that they have dark vision anymore, which I find is a frequent problem, especially in 5th edition. Because so many things have dark vision, everyone gets really used to it. This is a really great way to visually represent the fact that creatures can't see. So on the player client side, the player would just be going into the darkness. And if they were foolish enough to be like, right, okay, I just keep walking forward without illuminating this area in any way, we can see on the GM side, eventually they would walk off the edge of this hastily made little bridge and into a body of water. But then if the player was to say, I want to light a torch, I can control that on my end too. I just have to double right click on the token, which will bring up the token configuration, and I can set that player's token as a source of light to represent the fact that they have a torch in their inventory. So if we want 20 feet of dim light and 10 feet of bright light, and we want our color to be a yellowy kind of white tone, we can update that, and suddenly they have that torch, and on their setting they can go and they have a torch in their hands, and as they move around, the light will follow them and they can see what is in front of them. And this is a really cool way of representing darkness in your games. I think for me particularly, it's going to rapidly change how my players approach dungeon delving because they've got that really visual representation. Foundry also has sound options, so you have options to add ambient sounds. So if I wanted to go ahead and make a sound here, it brings up a sound box dialog. I can add a sound file, an MP3, and I can decide how far the sound carries, whether it's blocked by walls, and some of its other parameters. So say one of the players moved into this room and this room is filled with water, I could get the sound of running water or drips, add that into there, and then as they approach within the radius of that sound marker that I've dropped in, it will start playing the sounds for them, further adding to the immersion of the players as they explore this area little by little and can only see what they can actually see with the light available to them. I think it will make exploration of a dungeon so much more immersive for the players and help them get that sense that you often get when you're playing in person, where you're able to use sounds and everyone can hear it and you can control the environment around you. I think this goes a long way to replicating that. And then at the bottom there's journal notes. That just allows you to add notes to let you know things as the game master as they are progressing. Down here at the bottom left corner you have the little roll call section, so that just lets you know who is in the game. At the moment it would be myself and Goop's player. Then you've got a hotbar here where you can add quick actions, particularly useful if you're a player. You can add your abilities down here, add your attack rolls, things like that, so that you don't have to open your character sheet every time. Then speaking of the character sheet, let's go ahead and pull that up right now. So if I jump over into the player option and double click on the icon for my character, you'll see it will pull up my player sheet. There's a little icon here that says D&D Beyond. That's because I've got that D&D Beyond importer module, which allows me to pull my players' information from D&D Beyond as well. So all they need to do is update their sheets on D&D Beyond, which they can do from their phones or anywhere where they have access to the internet, and then I can pull that information into the game to make sure I've always got the most up-to-date version of the player sheet. But you can see that the character sheet is as you would expect. It's got the attributes, it's got skills, it's got death saves, and it's got the inventory and features and effects that they have and all that kind of stuff. And if we go ahead and click on the features, it shows everything that they get, some magic arrows, the different extra attacks and things like that. And then if we jump into the inventory, you can see here that Goop has a +1 longbow, and if we want to make that attack, you can see that there's a little dice here that kind of glows. So we click that, and here on the right we see that longbow come up. We get the option for doing an attack, whether or not we want to add any bonuses, or whether we want it to have advantage or disadvantage. We're just going to click normal. It will roll a dice. You can see that I've got that 3D dice from my module that will give you your result, and then you can click damage and decide whether it's a critical hit or a normal hit. Again, it rolls that dice. There's a little sound effect which is really nice, and it shows you the damage. Over on the right of the screen there's a bunch more options, all broken down into little tabs. The first one is the public chat log, and this is where you can type things and say stuff to your players, or you can... Didn't know it did that, so that's really cool. Turns out if you speak as a player, it zooms in on the player. Does it do that on the client side? It does. That is super cool. But you can add messages, and then you can also do your attacks and your damages, all those other roles. I have a little dice tray module which just adds some dice options down here, so I can click and I can roll dice through there without having to type in the commands. By default, you have to type in /r or r/ whatever dice you want to use. That's not super user friendly, so I have this little dice tray UI as well as my 3D rolling dice that just makes it a little more interesting and a little more user friendly. Next up we have encounters, and that works much in the way that it does on other systems. You select a number of tokens or combatants, pull them together into an encounter, which is then stored so you can cycle through encounters and track initiative and HP and the positioning of everything on the map. So if I go ahead here and jump back into the Game Master side of things, and you can see there's no active encounter. So if I just go into my token selection option, highlight all of the tokens, right click, and there's a little option for toggle combat state. If I do that, everyone gets added to the combat tracker. You can see whether they're visible or not. You can make them invisible so the players can't see them or they're not in the combat tracker. You can see their HP. You can also define what you want to track. So you can track AC or XP. There's a whole bunch of different options to be able to track here. Then you can also link them to a specific scene. So I could say that this particular encounter only applies to the Tomb of the Jade Tyrant and it wouldn't be available anywhere else. You can roll your NPC's initiatives either all together or individually, and you can also mark things as defeated or dead. If you right click on them, you can update, reroll initiative, or remove them. And then when you're ready to begin combat, you click begin combat and it will track the rounds. You can go to the next combatant, you can go to the next round as they go. But it is nice that as you can see, as you scroll over each one in the encounter tracker, it highlights their name, and highlights them in the combat tracker if you select that token, which is nice to be able to figure out who is who, especially when you've got multiple enemies of the same type. The next tab for Game Masters is the scene directory, and that's how we get these maps essentially at the top here. So I've got one for my Ashk map and one for my Tomb of the Jade Tyrant, and it allows you to switch between them, and you can right click on them and make them active. The players will only ever see the active scene, and you can only have one active scene at once. But you can add multiple scenes, you can add folders for scenes. So if you had a location, let's say Castle Ravenloft, and you wanted to add multiple maps for all the different locations, you could create a folder, call it Castle Ravenloft, and then in Castle Ravenloft you'd have all of your different scenes, which would be your maps. You go into each of them, you add your monsters, you create the encounter specific to that scene, and then everything would be set up and ready to go. Next up we have the actor directory. This is where you can make characters specific for this campaign or this scene. You can see because I've added skeletons in here, it's added 3 skeletons into the list. This is typically not something I pay too much attention to. Because I have that D&D importer, I use a different method of adding creatures, but if you are adding them yourself, you would create actors from this point, and an actor is any creature, be it a player character or an NPC, and you have the option to change between player character, non-player character, or vehicle. You create those, and then you have the ability to search or nest them in folders if you want enemies and friends and your party. Next you have an area for items. This is where you're going to find all the items you've created for your game, all your weapons, your armors, your potions, everything like that. But this is where you would create all your items, store all your items. When you're using the SRD, this is where they'll all be displayed. Then we go over to journal entries, and to show you that I just need to hop back over into my world map, and you can see there are little tokens over some of my areas that relate to journal entries. Now this is just to give me the option to see some important information. So if I go ahead and click Kadim here, I've got a little text box where I can go in, I can add information about a location. I can do this on battle maps to say, right, okay, in this room, remember that there is a key hidden under this tile, or this is the room in which they're going to find this NPC, or whatever it needs to be, and that helps me remember those aspects. On the player side, if you go into journal entries, you only have journal entries that the GM has shared with you. So as a GM, I can go ahead and right click on Kadim, and I can configure the permissions. So I can change it so that all of the players become an observer and save those changes. And then over on the journal entry side for the players, they can then click Kadim and they'll be able to see but not change anything I've written about it. Really good way to track your world. If you have a map like this and you want to give people information about the different areas, and you want to tell them some of the headline information for a location, you can do that through the journal entry. Next up, we have rollable tables. This allows you to create random tables for anything and everything you want. Next up, this is a relatively recent addition. I believe it's a card feature, so you can add cards. This isn't something that I've played around with a whole bunch, but if you run a game that is quite heavy, has a heavy focus on using cards, that is incorporated so that you can still benefit from that mechanic and that feel without having to physically have the cards, which is really nice. Then we get to audio playlists. This is for sharing music with your players. So if you have a playlist of sounds, you could create a soundscape for your dungeon. So for example, for the Tomb of the Jade Tyrant, what I might do is I might say, right, this is a session that I expect to last a number of hours, and I might go and get music for the different tones that are being applied throughout. So when they're outside, I might get something that has more of a desert feel, and then I might have a track that has a bit more of an ominous sensation as they go through the doors, some combat music for each of the primary combats, some exploration music, and then maybe some music for the conclusion. I could line all that up as a playlist here in the audio panel, play those as we were going through, and then I can also add all those ambient sounds, so the dripping of water or the scraping of stone, the flicker of a fire, and using all those tools together, absolutely not necessary, but combine them with the light tool and the animations to the light tool, you can create a really immersive experience for your players, far more so than pretty much any platform I've used, certainly way more advanced than Fantasy Grounds is, which is what I've mostly used, and much more user-friendly in what I've experienced so far than Roll20. And then we come to the compendium. The compendium is your sort of everything else area, and it is where I go for most of my stuff, because that is where the modules that I use put all of their information. So the D&D Beyond information, for example, all of the SRD. So if I go ahead here and click on SRD, you can see that we get the list of all of the SRD monsters, and you can see that by default most of the SRD monsters have tokens available to them by default through Foundry, which is really nice. So if I wanted to grab a troll and drop a troll involved, I can use these lovely assets. I believe that these assets are from Forgotten Adventures. They look like that art style. They're really nice assets, and it means that you don't have to go ahead and make those. But it's through this compendium that I, because I have that D&D Beyond integration, monitor all my stuff. So all of my D&D Beyond monsters are here, and you can see that it pulls in the picture of them from D&D Beyond, and as you can see, it will pull in the images from those monsters from D&D Beyond. So if I used a frost giant skeleton, it pulls in a token from the artwork for the frost giant skeleton, and you can always change that if you wanted to as well. You can go ahead and change the identity and the appearance and change the image of the token and how large it is, all that kind of stuff, just by clicking on the settings of the token. And then this last tab is the settings for Foundry. So go over here, it will show you what version and build you're on, show you what version of the game system you're using, how many modules you've got, and then you've got a bunch of options to configure settings, configure the controls, change your modules up, edit your world, and invite players. And then when you're done with this side bit, you can just click over here and get it to pop over to the side. If you want to drag any of these out in their own little window, you can right click on them and it brings them up as an independent thing. So let's say I wanted to create my encounter, my combat tracker, and my chat log, and nothing else. I can drag my chat log around, I can drag my combat tracker around, and I can have a much cleaner experience that is exactly what I want. And that's kind of everything with Foundry. It's very open-ended, very customizable. You can create exactly the kind of experience you want. You can change almost everything that you see on the screen, or the way in which you interact with it can be changed if you have the know-how, or you can go and get modules to create a vast array of options for yourself. Overall, I am seriously impressed with Foundry. If nothing else, just the way the light interacts with walls and everything else would be amazing and really improve the immersion for my online games. But then when you add in all of the other elements, especially for me, being able to import D&D Beyond stuff through those modules and integrations makes a massive difference. One thing that I would really like to see in the future is Foundry acquiring official licenses for 5th edition to be able to create modules for the official books and sell those through the Foundry website. Because if you don't have D&D Beyond, or if that module went away for some reason, or if you didn't have kind of the knowledge to be able to go through the steps necessary to set that up, it would be nice to just have the option that goes, right, okay, I want to buy the player's handbook, I want to buy the monster module, load them in as modules, everything is there, everything's set up, and I'm good to go. But I'd be really interested to know what you think of Foundry down in the comments below. Is this a VTT that looks interesting to you? Would you consider changing from your current setup? I'd like to know what everyone who is using VTTs is playing on. Do you use Roll20? Do you use Fantasy Grounds or something else? Let me know in the comments down below, because I'd be really interested to see how you feel about Foundry compared to the system that you already use. Don't forget to sign up for the cheat sheet Kickstarter down in the description below. But until next time, happy gaming.